Okay, welcome to USA Wrestling's media teleconference through Zoom. We'd like to give a short introduction and then introduce our panelists, and then we will go directly to questions. Couple of points. As a webinar, journalists will have the ability to raise their hand to be asking a question, and then we can turn on your audio. At that point, we also have the ability in the chat to be able to give journalists a chance to ask a question in the chat, and then we can read it. There may be some people that are not able to make a question based upon, the technology at hand or anything of that sort. We certainly would like to hear questions from all members of the media that have them. A short intro. I'm Gary Abbott, the Director of Communications for USA Wrestling. The reason for this press conference is to allow some leaders of USA Wrestling to give more perspective on last night's decision regarding USA Wrestling's executive committee deciding not to field a team for the World Championships. Many media know that quite a while ago, United World Wrestling added a Senior World Championships in 2020, scheduled in December. No final decision had been made on whether or not that was going to progress as the Executive Committee, United World Wrestling, dealt with it. Had information but did not make final decisions on that. Since then, all of the age group World Championships on the international level have been canceled. However, last Monday on the 12th, United World Wrestling announced that they would be moving forward with the Senior World Championships in Belgrade in December, allowing countries to sign up, and also saying there would be one more step on the 5th of November when they review not only the entries for the event, but also will review the status of the COVID-19 pandemic at that time. And we'll make a final determination whether to move forward or cancel. With that said, USA Wrestling, as one of the teams going, had a series of meetings to discuss participation. Started with an executive committee meeting, a meeting of our athlete advisory committee, two special COVID-19 committees, our public relations and messaging committee, as well as our COVID-19 advisory committee with medical and science government experts, and then a final executive committee meeting last night. You may have seen the press release, but a decision was made last night that USA Wrestling would not be attending the World Championships in December in Belgrade, Serbia. There are three people that are speaking to answer questions. We'll start with Bruce Baumgartner, President of USA Wrestling, and he's the chairman of the executive committee. Bruce was reelected as our president over the summer. This is his second stint as being a USA Wrestling president. He also served a number of years ago for a few terms. As an athlete, Bruce, two-time Olympic champ, three-time world champ, four-time Olympic medalist, one of our greatest athletes, also active in the college community as an athletic director and coach and administrator at Edinburgh University. Also joining him is Veronica Carlson, who's a member of USA Wrestling's executive committee, one of the three athlete representatives on that committee, serves as the chairperson of USA Wrestling's athlete advisory committee. Senior world team member, junior world silver medalist in women's freestyle during her competitive career. Our other guest is Dr. Bernard J. Feldman, MD, member of our COVID-19 advisory committee, serves on the United World Wrestling Medical Commission, and also has spent more than 3 decades as a physician for both USA Wrestling and United World Wrestling. At this point, without further ado, we will take questions from any journalists. Feel free to raise your hand, and then I will call out the name of the journalist, and then the next one will come up after that. I've got a question from Jason Bryant, Matt Talk Online. Jason's question is, there's been a discussion via social media about how athletes were asked. Some athletes said their voice wasn't heard, while others there wasn't a huge response to the survey. What's the process and how are individual athletes represented on the AAC? Veronica, you want to start with that, and then Bruce?
Sure. So when we got the news that this could be a possibility, we decided it would be extremely important to gauge the athlete voice and response, since they're most affected by this decision than anybody else in the organization. So the AAC posed that we create a survey. It outlined multiple questions and kind of gauged the scenarios of what this World Championships would look like, and asked if athletes were willing to go likely, not likely, neutral, or would not go. And so that survey was sent out to national team, as well as the top 8 from the recent nationals. They had 3 days to complete the survey, and the response that came back was surprising to me. I figured that there'd be overwhelming support to go, but we saw that it was between 30 and 40% for each question for a strong yes, and about 30% for no, and then somewhere in the neutral range for that rest of the percentages. We encouraged athletes to reach out. I'm not sure how much else there is to it, but athletes were represented on all the committees that made these decisions. We made ourselves available for questions, and we had a vote in the decision too. So the athletes that were chosen or appointed to represent the athlete voice did have a vote in the decision.
Any additional information, Bruce?
I can address that. The Athletes Advisory Committee, all of our national team athletes have an opportunity to run for the position, and then there's actually a voting process. So, the athletes select their own representation to the Athletes Advisory Committee, and then they also select their leadership on the executive committee and the various, standing committees with USA Wrestling. So, although I believe the athletes' input was considered and heard, I think I can speak for myself, but most of the people on the executive committee looked at the survey, listened to what our athletes had to say at the different committees, and ultimately still came up with the decision that we have, currently in front of us.
Okay, Dave Matthews, do you feel like we've fixed the technical issues, or should I go forward with another chat question?
I'm going to go with Joe Varden. Joe Varden, you're able to talk. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I did unmute myself. You guys hear me now?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for taking the questions here. I'm covering the Olympics for The Athletic, and I've been getting your press releases and kind of following along from afar. And I don't pretend to know that much about wrestling, so forgive me, but this seems like a pretty big deal, and I'm wondering how this relates to whether you think you can participate in the Olympics, whether you think there will be one, can you train for it? Like, these are things that I'm all very interested in.
Bruce, I'll let you start with that one, please.
Joe, I am very optimistic that the Olympics will go on next summer in 2021, as will the World Championships in Oslo in 2021 in wrestling. We're hoping, and I think Japan is putting in protocols in Tokyo to have a safe environment. I think the science in possibly a vaccine, a cure, and at least how to deal with the coronavirus will be much more understood as we plan to train, qualify, and go to the Olympics. So I am very optimistic that the Olympics will continue and move forward. At this point, as the executive committee voted, it just does not seem prudent to send our athletes to Serbia with the current coronavirus conditions at this point.
Okay, I see Gerard Farrick has his hand raised. Dave?
Gerard, you're able to talk if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. And that's awesome. You got my name correct. I think that doesn't happen that often. First try. My question is, given the fact that obviously this year there haven't been as many possible competitions, are you guys looking at or planning to look at adding high level, top level, either domestic or other competitions, say earlier in 2021, as to help them get ready for the Olympics in July?
Bruce, so I'll let you get started with that, and then if you'd need some support from staff, we can also add to that.
Yeah, I think, Gerard, we're going to do as an organization what we can to prepare our senior level athletes the best and the safest methods we can. And as the wrestling world opens up, we will consider doing what is necessary to have a great Olympic trials and prepare our team the best for the Olympic Games. And I don't know if Rich Bender, the executive director, wants to chime in on your answer in particular, but I think almost anything is on the table to help our athletes in a safe manner be prepared for the Olympics next summer.
Yes, Bruce, I think what I'd add to that is that we're keenly aware of the necessity for elite athletes to have competition prior to these big events, the Olympic trials and ultimately the Olympic Games, and are keenly aware of responsibilities that we have as an organization to provide those environments in safe environments for those athletes to participate. We've had numerous conversations with our international federation and other federations around the world about how do we create those type of environments in light of the current circumstances to provide that safe competition. We're seeing a lot of that domestically already with some individual showcase matches, et cetera. We've been in contact with our national team athletes about what their periodization schedule should look like. Our coaches are, as I said earlier, very aware of what's needed, and we will continue to pursue vigorously opportunities, both domestic and abroad, when the environment is right. I think, ultimately what's different with this event compared to those events is, I think the executive committee made the decision that those environments maybe could be created in a more controlled situation, as opposed to take all comers and bring 70 nations together in a kind of take all comers type environment. I think was where they felt there was a reason to pause.
So at this point, we've had a number of questions placed in the chat. I see a few athletes who've raised their hands, but we will kind of go back and forth between those that have typed in and those that have their hand raised. At this point, I've got Mark Lundy, who has a question for Dr. Feldman. Can you talk about the medical related issues that went into the decision process concerning COVID, athlete safety, traveling while in Serbia, possible sequestration before or after the event? Dr. Feldman?
All right. Well, I was asked, I received a proposed medical plan from UWW in August of this year that was drafted by their chief medical officer, who's on the UWW Medical Commission with me. And I did indeed review it, and I think it was fairly comprehensive and it was well done. But I expressed my opinion in a letter back to them on September 6th, that because of how erratic and unpredictable the virus had, what was going on with it at that point, I wasn't really confident that it would be safe to hold the event in December, even though there were several months left. There was no reason to anticipate that there was going to be this dramatic resolution of the worldwide pandemic. In fact, at this point, the situation is even worse than it was in September. I mean, there's been a surge worldwide in Europe and the US with more hospitalizations and more cases and more deaths. So that was certainly one of the issues, one of the most important issues that we considered in making this decision. Also, the logistics of traveling, bringing a delegation of 50 people or close to that, coming into to Belgrade. I've been to Belgrade and Serbia several times, and they recently sent a proposed plan to implement a bubble type environment like the NBA used in Orlando, so that the people participating in the World Championships would be in separate hotels, and the bus transportation, everything would be controlled. Nevertheless, of course, the NBA and Major League Baseball and the other professional sports in the US have unlimited financial resources to support that type of system. I think their proposal was a very innovative idea, but I think the ability to implement that effectively and efficiently is of some concern to me. And also I mean, if one of our athletes or coaches or a member of our staff were to become ill in Serbia, in all honesty, I am concerned about the availability and the accessibility of top caliber medical care to support the care of that type of individual. Likewise, the logistics of once somebody gets infected or is infected over there, the logistics of getting them out of Serbia and getting them back into our country. I mean, commercial airlines aren't going to allow someone who's infected with COVID to get on a commercial airplane. So there are a whole complex of issues that and this decision was a very deliberative and careful process, and we considered all factors. We understand the motivation and how hard the athletes have worked, and that was certainly taken into consideration. But we thought that it was not an advisable decision to put a delegation of U.S. athletes and staff in harm's way.
At this point, we've received a question from Mike Finn. Mike, I'll read the question, but we may be able to get you to be able to speak as well. Mike Finn from Win Magazine. What did you learn from hosting an event at Senior Nationals that played a part in the decision? And at Senior Nationals, were there any COVID infections that we're aware of from the event? Mike, can you speak? Is there any more to go to that question at this point? Okay, I'm gonna.
At this point, Mike, I think it's your computer. I think it's Michael, your computer's just not working with Zoom right now.
Okay, so let's start with the question about what we learned from the Senior Nationals. Bruce, would you like to start with that or have Rich answer that, please?
I think Rich might be best to answer that at this point.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Mike. And certainly we were really excited with the outcome of the senior nationals in Iowa. I think it proved that there is a pathway for our sport to compete in this environment. If you take the proper precautions on the front end and the back end, detailed tracing was done prior to the start of each session, and we continue to survey athletes afterwards. And to answer your question, we've had a couple of symptoms popped up, but so far no infections. So we think that it's the pathway for us to start to open this sport back up, and think that if that due diligence is taken, I think there's a chance for us to be successful. And I think the other confidence we have is now knowing that if we work in close cooperation with the local public health officials and ensure that the medical support is in place if God forbid we need it, and have a strategy to be able to make sure that if anyone is infected, we can get them the top-notch care that they would deserve and have access to that.
Any other follow-up on that? At this point, I'm going to go to a journalist who's raised their hand. Rachel Bachman from the Wall Street Journal.
Rachel, you can unmute yourself and you can talk.
Got it. Thank you. Just to follow up to that question, actually, I'm wondering, it's my understanding that there wasn't testing done before senior nationals. What kind of mechanism was there in place to catch asymptomatic cases after the event? So if someone didn't present symptoms, how would you know whether they had an infection if you didn't test them?
I can take that, Gary, and thanks, Rachel, for that question. Good to hear from you. And you're correct, there wasn't testing done prior to the event. Detailed surveys would have been sent out afterwards, and I think we're tracking very positively. There's a pretty high number of responses to the athletes and participants clearly understanding their responsibility to share information that they have in terms of any symptoms that might pop up. And we've been really pleased with the response so far. And certainly if there is any symptoms that pop up, we have a system in place to notify those that we're in close contact to ensure that we can be transparent with the notification of those people that potentially could be exposed to someone that has the virus.
Okay, yeah, I guess just to clarify, my question was about asymptomatic cases. So a lot of COVID cases are asymptomatic, so people can spread it even not knowing whether they're positive. What happens with folks like that? Is you just don't hear about them?
I think that'd be accurate.
Okay.
Next question. I'm going to go to a typed question from Justin Bash. What's the decision behind not allowing athletes to send themselves or enter themselves? There are a ton of top guys willing to make the risk and try to win gold. What's the decision behind not allowing athletes to enter on their own? Bruce?
Well, it's USA's Wrestling's responsibility to make sure we provide a safe atmosphere for our athletes. And if we are not willing to send them as an organization, I don't think it would be prudent for us to send them individually. We do, USA Wrestling is responsible and has to, is the only governing body in the US for wrestling for the UWW. So, the fact that we don't support as a executive committee going over, I don't think it would be prudent, again, for us to allow individual athletes to put themselves or in a way, the national team at risk.
Okay, I've got a hand raise from Tom Shad. Identify your media outlet, please, Tom, and your mic should be open, I believe.
Well, thank you guys for doing this. I'm with USA Today Sports. My question is about the risks that come with competition on an international level versus kind of all the ballyhoo and travel surrounding it. what are, maybe this is best for Dr. Feldman, what are specifically the risks of transmission that come in an actual match with two people from different countries? And are those risks greater than the risks that come with overall travel and kind of everything that comes with competing? Which of those is the greater risk?
Well, I mean, wrestling is a body contact sport, the ultimate body contact sport, to say the least. And so wrestlers, typically are coughing on one another, spitting on one another, sweating on one another, and the risk of transmitting the disease, since most of it is transmitted by an airborne basis, there is risk in the actual competition. The concept of testing the athletes before they travel to the country that they're going, and also when they arrive at the country, certainly lowers the risk of that. But it's, I mean, wrestling certainly presents more risk to the athletes to contract COVID from an opponent who's infected than tennis or basketball. I mean, there's much more individual body contact between the competitors in wrestling than most other sports. So there are significant risks if the athletes are not properly screened and tested, and precautions are, not taken to isolate them from other people who might be infected.
Dr. Feldman, there was also a question about travel and other things it would do with an international event.
Right. Well, the travel, in our press release, Gary alluded to the fact that our State Department has currently listed Serbia as a level 3, which basically means reconsider travel because of the coronavirus situation. And so that's a pretty high risk. And having had experience going to many world championship and Olympic events as a physician, many of the countries who come in, even though they're informed about what they need to have before they leave and what they need to have once they get there, I don't know if some of it may be a language barrier, but unfortunately, a lot of people arrive who don't have what they were requested to have before they come. Something as simple as the medical examination that's required by your team physician before departure. Very often athletes come in from all over the world who haven't been examined, and it becomes a problem, especially with that many countries participating. The actual risks of being infected are I would say, with that many countries, I think it's higher than it would be if you're just having an event in a national area, like in the U.S., traveling from state to state. Certainly, there's a lot of variability between the situation that's going on, and not only worldwide, but in our country. Certain states have much higher risk right now, much higher incidence of new cases. But the recent trend has been that new cases have been escalating, I think at this point in over 40 states. So that's a worrisome trend.
Thank you, Dr. Feldman. Going to another of the Q&A questions. Tony Hager is asking, will the USA Wrestling Preseason Nationals be canceled? Over 1,500 athletes are coming from across Iowa. Rich, I think that would be for you.
Yep, nope, that event is still on.
Another question from Willie Saylor of Mat Scouts. Was this decision made on the basis of safety of your athletes or spread of the global community? Bruce?
You know, it was, I would say 100% based on the safety of our athletes. I'd like to say we're very noble and we want to caution global spread, but our major concern was the safety of our athletes and, you know, on the case that somebody did test positive and get sick, USA Wrestling's ability to, as Dr. Feldman said, provide the proper treatment, transportation, healthcare for our athletes. And that was, you know, the major emphasis, our athletes' well-being, along with our staff, our officials, our coaches' well-being also. I mean, it takes a contingency to go over there. It's just not one athlete or just the athletes.
Okay. Let's see. I'll pull one of the other typed questions. Again, I appreciate your everyone working with that. From Tony Rotundo. A lot of people seem to be under the impression we only send athletes and coaches to the Worlds. Can you speak about the delegation that goes with the athletes and if any decisions been made on what that delegation might have looked like for this event?
Gary, I can take that. I mean, and as you can imagine, Tony, and I know you've been, you know, around and part of those delegations. Obviously, you know, we send support staff that support the medical side of our team, coaching support, media support, and other staff support. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question entirely, but yeah, the delegation is much larger than if you just were talking about a specific discipline, 10 athletes. There's, in a normal world championship, there's training partners involved, there's medical staff involved, communication staff involved, coaches involved, and other staff members to handle logistics.
I have a follow-up question from Jason Bryant of Mat Talk Online. One question surfacing from Van Base is why USA Wrestling feels it can host youth events and a senior event in Iowa with hundreds of competitors, but not send a team to the Worlds. We'll start with Bruce Baumgartner on that.
Well, I think Dr. Feldman and I have alluded to it is that, you know, we're much more comfortable with our controlling the procedures, working with the local health officials, providing adequate medical care. It's as simple as, you know, out in Iowa, if last weekend or the weekend before, if somebody tested positive and had to go home, there's a possibility of driving them home. We have very little control over any of those variables if we send our athletes to Serbia. And I believe, and I could let Dr. Feldman and or Rich add to that, but I know that was a lot of the discussion in the U.S. When we're working with our local health officials, we feel that we can control enough variables to make it reasonably safe for our athletes.
Okay, I got a question from Jack Hurley. Jack, again, it was nice working with you at the Open last week. The question is, do you know what the decision-making process is like for other countries with wrestling federations? Are there major differences between how USA Wrestling and international federations that do plan to send teams make their decisions?
Gary, I can take a shot at that. You know, I think there's incredible diversity around the world in terms of how wrestling teams are assembled to participate in events like the World Championship. I think there are many countries like the United States that has a detailed process by which they provide a fair opportunity for anyone to make the team and to represent their country in a world championship type event. I think there's countries that maybe don't have the depth or the need to do any kind of a selection procedures and can specifically name athletes to participate in the event. I think there's variables all in between those two scenarios. So I think some countries will just name their team. Some countries will have a selection process to allow the athletes to earn the right in that particular competition. In terms of decisions to go or not to go, I think it's also very, there's a lot of diversity there too as well. I mean, we are blessed to have a strong National Olympic Committee and an infrastructure that includes national governing bodies that are empowered through the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act to carry out that business of the specific sports. We have 55 of those now in the United States that represent the various Olympic and Pan Am only sports. But in terms of some countries, that decision is made by their local sports, or not their local, but their national sports authority. So I mean, there's a lot of diversity around how those decisions are made, and not one is probably exactly the same as the United States is, but a lot of variables there.
A question from JD Rader of Flow Wrestling. Will athletes be allowed to compete at upcoming international events, such as the Alans in Russia, Matteo Pellicone in Italy, and Sarah Pilato in Cuba?
So Gary, I'll take a shot at that. And obviously, the ultimate authority to make those decisions lies with the executive board of USA Wrestling, led by Bruce. But I think it's our hope that the answer to that is yes, that there will be breakthroughs in vaccines and procedures to mitigate risk around the world that will provide safe environments for athletes to travel and compete. It's our hope that day's coming soon, and I think it's a reason for us there's reasons for us to be optimistic that those days are coming.
I would echo what Rich says, is that, we have every intention, if it is safe, to participate in those type of international tournaments. But again, if it's not deemed to be safe for our athletes, there may have to be some tough decisions. But I do feel, and when you look at, and some of our experts feel, that there might be some vaccines, some treatments, some medications coming through, some processes that might make it significantly safer by the time that those tournaments are competed.
Okay. And again, I appreciate everyone doing the typed in questions. Got a follow up from Justin Bash. When was, if the decision made to pull Living the Dream funds for this year? It's my understanding athletes were told before polling there would be no financial incentive this year, though it is the first time, to my understanding, since the inception of the fund, it would not be available. Is that standard practice, that it's decided on, agreed upon each year prior to World's Olympic Games?
I can take that, Gary. And first and foremost, the answer is never. The decision was never made to not provide Living the Dream Medal Fund support to athletes. It was part of a questionnaire the questionnaire that Veronica referred to was, would athletes be impacted if those resources weren't available? And just so everyone's clear in terms of where those resources come from, for example, the $250,000 gold medal bonus to win the Olympic Games comes from a combination of the resources provided by USA Wrestling, resources provided by the United States Olympic Committee, and a bulk of those resources come from a group of just over a dozen incredibly generous stewards who are incredibly inspired by this pursuit of Olympic and World Championship excellence by our athletes. So never was that decision made to pull that funding. It was a part of a questionnaire to athletes and to determine whether that would impact their decision one way or the other to go or not to go. And it was never a decision by USA Wrestling to pull that funding. And the other, I was also informed that there was some discussion about potentially that USA Wrestling had spent that money on something else, and that's not how it works. How it works specifically for the Living the Dream Medal Fund is then after the World Championships, the distribution is made to the athletes, and a percentage is paid by each one of the stewards in the U.S. Olympic Committee and the USA Wrestling to pay the athletes. So there's no money that comes in until the performance is actually turned in. So that's 100% false if someone is insinuating that money's been used for other things, or that USA Wrestling made the decision not to provide that for this event. I think there is some language in the medal fund agreements with some of the stewards that if World or Olympic Games aren't fully participated, that potentially that there would be that discussion, but those conversations were not had, nor will, I mean, I can say from my involvement, and obviously not as a voting member, but the executive board through this process, finances was not discussed in terms of what was the cost, was there a savings, who would pay for what. It was clearly focused on the health and safety of the delegation.
Follow up from Mike Finn of Win Magazine. Whether it's sports or everyday life, there are those believe the serious nature of the virus and others do not. How frustrating is that? It seems whatever decision is made, somebody would be upset. Bruce?
I can tell you, as an athlete, the athlete part of me really struggled with this because you hate to, and in this case, we decided not to add another opportunity for our athletes because they'll still be able to compete and try out for the 2021 Olympics and the 21 World Championships. But it was a very tough decision, and we knew in talking to our the PR committee, and I talked to athletes board members. I mean, we sort of knew that no matter what decision we made, we were going to take some criticism for it, and we tried to make sure that the decision was based on what we felt were the experts, the USOPC medical staff, our doctors, our committees, the athlete input, and we made, I believe, the decision that is the best for our athletes at this time with the information we have. And yes, it was a difficult one. It was one of the tougher decisions we had to make. And I think most of us knew that there was going to be people criticizing us either way. If we would have gone, there would have been people criticizing us. And if we, the decision we made, where we know we're getting some criticism on, social media and some other platforms. So, but I do believe it's the right decision. We tried to make it in a political void. We're not making a political statement. We're doing what, the 13 executive committee members and their different advisory groups, the collective wisdom to not send a team.
Veronica, would you feel comfortable talking about maybe the frustrations with the decision, especially in your role representing athletes?
Just as Bruce said, it's really conflicting. I think that everybody on that committee voted against what they wanted, but we knew there's just so much mounting evidence that gave us the go-ahead to say this is the right decision and we need to make it now so that the athletes have time to recover, reset, prepare for what's really important, which is the Olympic Games. I'm not a competing athlete, but the other two athletes on the executive board are, and I don't think anyone was put in a more difficult position than they were yesterday.
Follow up to Veronica. The word we heard is the athletes wanted a quick decision so that they could do the proper planning. Is that accurate based upon what you had with your discussions at the athlete advisory committee level, but also individually with different U.S. athletes?
Yes, the athletes pushed to have a decision made quickly so that they could prepare. They felt that drawing this decision out ultimately was hurting their training and their planning.
I'm going to review other questions here, and then, you know, obviously, I believe we can still do the verbal questions if people raise their hand, but I have not done all the questions. And again, this might be one for Rich. Status of the junior U23s in Omaha, early November.
Yeah, those are still on the calendar.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to go through these last questions. If anyone else has additional questions that we haven't done, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I will give a minute or so for that.
Hey, Gary, if I could just speak a second on process here. I think it's important for people to understand the due diligence that was taken by this organization to make arguably the most difficult decision in the history of our organization, or one of them, right? I mean, I think it's foundational to what a national governing body's responsibility is to provide athletes with an opportunity to, and I've said this before, I think the purest pursuit in all sports is an American wrestler trying to win a gold medal for his or her country. I think it's as pure as it gets, not motivated by fame or fortune, just that innate desire to be the best. And I think we should all celebrate the process that this organization went through with the leadership of Bruce and Veronica and the medical experts like Bernie and numerous people that had input into this decision. And I think at the end of the day, you know, it wasn't an emotional decision. It wasn't a decision based out of fear. It wasn't a decision based on emotion. It was a decision based on fact. And I think one of the frustrations that we have as we move forward is that when these decisions are made to be put on the calendar, let's not forget that the 2020 World Championships was not an event 6 months ago, right? It was just added recently to the calendar. And I think, you know, we feel pretty strongly that, you know, we hope that decisions are made based on science and fact and not the number of countries that want to participate. And at the end of the day, we all know, right? We want to wrestle, we want to participate. And just because 60 countries say they want to jump off a cliff doesn't mean that we all should jump off a cliff. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's really important to point out that this wasn't a decision based on fear, it wasn't a decision based on emotion. It was a decision based on fact. And I think facts are leading, our data is driving the actions of Bruce and the leaders of this organization. I'll tell you, I'm proud of that process. I'm devastated with the decision. Certainly support it, you know, as a staff member, but devastated for the athletes. Anytime there's an opportunity to participate against the world's best, we want to be there. And you know, but we can't just blindly, as I think our leaders made that decision. We can't blindly, you know, send athletes into an event that brings together 60 or 70 countries in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. And if you don't understand the difference between that risk and going to a local event in Iowa where there's a lot that can be controlled, then you know, I'm sorry, but that's the facts.
I do have one more from Jason Bryant. Did USA Wrestling have any insurance or information to the contrary that showed nations may not welcome travelers from the United States due to COVID-19? And this could also be through connecting airports going to the host country. Do we have any information regarding that, or what the possibility is with that?
Gary, I can address that briefly. We had the USOPC liaison to the State Department, and although we believed that there was the ability to get into Serbia, and they have a pretty lenient ability to get into their country, I heard no assurances that you know, we wouldn't have to connect through certain countries to get there, because as we know, certain European countries do not right now are not accepting individuals from the United States, even transfers. So Jason, to answer your question, you know, we knew we could get to Serbia, not sure by what route, and we had no guarantees from any other country at this point that we would be able to transfer, you know, connect through their country.
Okay, one last opportunity for questions. First of all, appreciate everybody's patience while we worked out our technical issues, but also want to thank them for joining us so that they could get a follow-up from yesterday's decision. Any other questions at this point? With that said, I'd like to thank specifically our panelists as well as each of the media members that joined. And if you have any follow-up needs regarding this or anything to do with USA Wrestling moving forward, please feel comfortable contacting myself, Taylor Gregorio, or Mike Willis from our communications staff, and we'll be sure to help you out with whatever you need. Do appreciate you joining us, and I look forward to continuing to work with you as we move forward throughout the rest of the Olympic year. Thanks, everybody, and be real well.
I'd like to thank everybody and for your support of wrestling, and we will get through these trying times and be back on the mat, hopefully in due time.